Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Bandwidth for TWiT specials is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com. This is a TWiT special, episode 38 for September 28, 2010. Don Tapscott and MacroWikinomics. Hello, everybody. Leo Laporte here. We're going to talk to Don Tapscott today. We've talked to him before. I hope you know his name. He wrote the business bestseller of the year 2007, perhaps of the decade, Wikinomics. His newest book, MacroWikinomics, came out today. He talks about how the internet, the digital generation, are changing everything, not just business, but government, education, everything we know. And I always like to talk to Don because while he's speaking the truth about what's about to happen, he also is always very uplifting and very positive. Let's get Don Tapscott on the line right now. This is your 14th book?
It is, and it's kind of my life's work. Basically, it's pretty exciting. That, as you know, I've been talking about this idea that we're going past an industrial age to some kind of new networked age for 30 years now. And these ideas were sort of ideas in waiting. And I think that they were waiting for the new web and for a new generation of digital natives for whom all this is like the air. And waiting for some big changes to the global economy, and now a convulsive shock to the system that's kind of waking everybody up and causing them to think differently about, basically to do some fundamental examination of the corporation and various other institutions in society. So I'm convinced this is not just a recession or some kind of aftermath of an economic meltdown, but that we're in a sea change here. This is actually happening. The industrial economy has run out of gas, and at the same time, we have a new communications medium that's enabling us to rethink everything from the media and science and healthcare and learning and the university and innovation, the corporation, our energy grid, transportation systems, our methods for global problem solving. All of these can be rebuilt now around a new model. So that's kind of the idea.
I am correct in ascribing to you the term digital natives, right? That was your thing. I'm not sure. I was the first one who used it in my mind, but there were others that started to use lay claim to it.
I know I coined the term net generation, and there were some other terms, the digital divide and so on, that we coined back then. I remember having the meeting of the Neologism Committee. Because people were back in the dot-com period, you know, it was the mid-'90s, and everybody was coming up with new words. And it was like, enough already. You got to get through the committee if you want to have a new word. So I chaired the committee, and I was kind of influential.
When did you write Wikinomics?
It came out the end of 2006, and it was the big book, as you know, in 2000.
Yes. But and it's funny because that's not so long ago in terms of books, but it's a lifetime in terms of the internet.
Yeah, for sure. But, you know, I was just talking to this guy today from the Journal, and he said most of what you wrote about Wikinomics was really radical at the time, but now it's like, it seems pretty commonplace.
Because it happened.
Yeah. I know.
You said the amateurs would get access to the tools, and we would, and I say we would take over. I mean, it all happened as much as you predicted. So why MacroWikinomics?
Well, the incident that kind of woke me up is I was giving a talk to a group called Sibos. This was 7,000 bankers, and it was 2 days after Lehman crashed. It was in Europe. And I stood up before these people, and they all were in total shock. And I thought, you know, Bob Dylan, there's something going on here, and you don't know what it is. This is not just a new model of how we innovate or orchestrate capability to create goods and services. This is the beginning of a very profound and fundamental change, not just in the architecture of the corporation, but in the modus operandi of every institution in society. Like the financial services industry needs more than a some capital and some new regulation. It needs a whole new modus operandi that's built on transparency and on integrity and on collaboration. And that whole thing was a violation of all of these fundamental principles that we sort of hold to be self-evident about how you need to function in a new networked age.
It used to be a zero-sum game, and now you're saying it's about collaboration.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, take financial services, okay? Right now, little companies can't get loans from banks. Why? Because banks have $1 trillion on their balance sheet of toxic assets.
Right.
It's actually $1 trillion plus or minus $1 trillion, and because nobody knows what these things are worth. So you can't mark them to model, because no one's going to believe the models the banks create. And you can't mark to market because there's no market. So why don't we create a Linux of risk management data? Basically take all of the information about these assets, put them in the commons, bring together tens of thousands of Linux modelers, and we can determine the real value of these assets, get them off the balance sheets, free up the banks to be able to start lending again and reboot the economy.
The wisdom of the crowds. Yeah,
basically. But it's a radical idea for banks. And banks, we talk about this in macroeconomics, and the banks say, well, our risk management is our source of competitive differentiation. Hello? It hardly conferred competitive differentiation.
How's that working out for you?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, oops. Kind of led to the downfall of the global financial system.
Differentiation, yes. Success, no. Yeah.
So this notion of collaboration that can occur, not a bunch of people sitting around in a meeting, but collaboration amongst peers on sometimes an astronomical scale is a very powerful idea.
You've done, in addition to this kind of pioneering work and how the internet changes business, you've also looked at how it changes culture, how the net generation has a completely different perspective on this. Does that make you hopeful that the generation that's coming up will get this, will transform it? Is it hopeless for our generation? Is it hopeful for theirs?
Well, it's hopeful for theirs for sure. Although they have an extraordinary situation right now.
They got a challenge, you bet.
This is the smartest generation ever. The top third are extraordinary. They're graduating like never before. It's never been tougher to get into the best schools and so on.
That's right.
And they come into the workforce and have this little thing called structural unemployment.
They got nothing.
Which is a cool term economists use for unemployment that isn't going to go away.
Right.
So the jobless recovery, that's a oxymoron if I ever heard it. It's like scented deodorant or military music, safe sex.
Jobless recovery. Well, we're better now. There's no work, but we're all better.
Yeah, right.
So does that mean it's going to be a generation of entrepreneurs, people who make their own jobs for themselves?
That's one thing. It's absolutely happening. And of course, again, little companies can have the benefits of big companies without the main liabilities. And 80%, and that's a good thing, because for jobs, 80% of growth, 80%, according to a study that we cite in Wikinomics, comes from new companies. So don't count on Hewlett-Packard to be the job problem. So that's a great thing. But the other thing is that these kids are doing all kinds of other amazing things. I was at a little dinner at Davos with Michael Porter, and he was talking about how the current crop of undergrads from Harvard is like nothing he's ever seen. He says the number one choice for undergraduates from Harvard is to go to Teach for America. Now, that's in part maybe because the job situation is not that great, but Harvard grads generally can get a job. It's more that these kids really care. They got a real sense of integrity. My son graduated from Amherst College, a little liberal arts university.
Great school, yeah.
And the convocation speech was, "We have one hope for you, that you will live a principled life of consequence." And that's a really big theme, for these kids these days. He went out, liberal arts degrees, an investment banker. But
oh dear.
But I'm not sure, honestly. I don't want to give away any, private information. I'm not sure that's his long-term future, because he wants to be consequential and that means a lot more than making a lot of buck.
Money. Right. Are you when I think when you say things like this isn't just a downturn, this is basically a complete collapse of how we did things and a reinvention of how we did things. It's a little grim sounding. Are you basically bullish?
Oh yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. In fact, MacroWikinomics there's a little depressing part in the beginning where we go through each of these institutions and show how they're in various states of atrophy or failure, complete collapse. The record industry, for example, it's the number 3 source of revenue for the U.S. labels we found from an industry insider is suing people that love its product.
Not a surprise. Not a surprise.
So that's bad when that's happening. But on the other hand, for every one of these institutions that's failing, there's sparkling new initiatives that are underway. And that's what the whole book is about. It's all these cases about how people are participating as peers and the so-called 4 pillars of society, from government, private companies, civil society organizations. And the 4th one, a new one that we announce, is you, the individual. You can be a pillar of society. I mean, Leo, you're sort of an example. I don't know if you got to that part of the book, but we actually wrote about you.
I heard. I haven't seen it yet, no.
But
you'd think I'd have flipped right to that chapter.
Yeah, don't you go to the index? That's what I always do. But anyway, this is extraordinary. I mean, an individual could never be a pillar of society in the past, but gee, you get a earthquake in Haiti, and all of a sudden, well, there may be 50 million people on Facebook causes. Most of them are just talking about it, but millions of them are actually raising money, and then a bunch are on Ushahidi finding people in the rubble, even though they live in Africa.
Right. So
people can now participate in all kinds of new ways, and whether it's this guy who established local motors. He was an Iraq a vet, and he saw his best buddies get killed in a Humvee beside him, and he decided he was going to do something purposeful, and he decided, we're over there trying to do all this stuff for oil, and we're doing that because of the auto industry. I'm going to rethink what is an automobile and how it gets built. So he's created Local Motors that has thousands of designers all around the world in contests, basically in challenges, designing the product, rather than these massive, 30 million square feet plants. He's got micro factories all around the U.S. now. He's using parts that are provided by the rest of the industry, and building cars that are environmentally good, that use good energy, that are safe, and that are custom to the needs of the individual consumers in the regions of the countries from which they come. So this is, to make the point that you and I have talked about before, but like people think about, social networking, wow, 500,000 people on Facebook. No, this is not about, that's extraordinary, but this is not about hooking up online or creating a gardening community. This is a new mode of production that's in the making. Social networking is becoming social production.
But Don, the mainline auto industry employs hundreds of thousands, probably millions of people. These little mom and pop car companies aren't. What happens to all these people? Aren't people just, isn't there going to be a huge economic dislocation? Well,
there is. And again, you can see that in every industry, or in many industries. So
there's some bad stuff.
Yeah, the media is a good example. So I write for the Huffington Post, and there's actually a front page story on the book there this morning, but I don't get paid. So how do we pay journalists?
That's a good model for the Huffington Post. Not so good for Don Tapscott.
Well, it's actually great for me.
Well, because you can see past the obvious. It's that quarterly report thinking. You can see past the obvious to the long-term benefit to you.
Yeah, in fact, the book for me is not a source of real revenue.
Boy, did I learn that.
Yeah, I mean, Wikinomics was, according to Amazon sales, the best-selling management book.
It's the number one book, business book of 2000. Yeah, or 2006, 7.
But I will make more money on 5 speeches than I'll make on the best-selling book for the whole year. So the book is kind of the billboard for ancillary rights, basically, and I'd give it away if I could. But I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just saying that because so many people are going to be out of work and there's going to be such a huge economic dislocation. Yes, you and I mean, I hate to use journalists as an example. Who cares what happens to 20,000 ink-stained wretches? You and I and many of them will probably find a way. But what about the people? I mean, we were in Detroit not so long ago at this beautiful Ford plant at the Rouge, the old, this is the old industrial heart of America. And I think about the millions of workers employed by the auto industry. If that industry is dying, what do they all start businesses? What happens?
Well, I'm actually going to Pittsburgh this weekend to do a Rust Belt tour.
Oh, that'll be fun.
With my fam, just on this exact point. Look at the world needs capability. We need to educate people. People need skills. People need to be connected. And we need to find new models whereby people can prosper as we create wealth. And Local Motors is not going to be GM,
right?
But it's going to employ lots of people, and it all of a sudden has a whole bunch of competitors too. And you can imagine moving to a very different model of the auto industry that will employ lots of people, kind of like a new model of the newspaper could actually employ lots of people. There are journalists today who make a living, bloggers today who make a living out of advertising, 100,000, 200,000. You put them all together in a network. You hire a marketing person. You have an accountant to do the actuarial economics to divvy up how the money gets distributed, and you have sort of a networked newspaper that's actually employing all these people, and where a lot of the basic ideas of journalism can be protected. If this network starts producing bad stuff, then it's going to lose credibility and trust. So there's a incentive for quality. The network's got to come up with really great stuff. So maybe they'll do some investigative journalism. They need to build relationships with consumers and so on. So I don't buy this whole thing that, we just don't know what's going to happen in the future. And my research approach is basically look at the lighthouse case studies, and from them try and understand the contours of how something new can evolve.
I think we kind of knew, thanks to you and people like you, we do kind of know what's going to happen in the future. But it's in the long run, it's the right thing. It's right sizing. It's sustainable. It's human scaled. I mean, there's all sorts of huge benefits, and I think our kids probably will be the first to benefit. But I do worry about a lost generation.
Yeah.
It's people our age, Don, who are just what happens to us,
Well, that's funny you say that. I think you're right, but most people think of the lost generation as youth today, and
they got it. I think I hope,
Well, we'll see, but a lot of them are going to figure stuff out.
I do worry, actually, and I'll let you answer that question, but I'll add a second clause to it. You mentioned the top third, the brightest, the best and the brightest, but I also worry about there's of course in every generation there's a large segment of people who don't have those skills, who count on low skill jobs, and those seem to be disappearing as well. So it may not just be our generation; it may be a large segment of the next generation too. So tell us something hopeful about those two groups.
Well, I wish I could. The top third, the young people today, the top third are extraordinary. Yes. As I said, the middle third are pretty good compared to previous generations. And the bottom third are dropping out of school.
That's what I worry about.
These are the people that this guy Mark Behrlein writes about in The Dumbest Generation. How the digital age stupefies young Americans and jeopardizes our future. Don't trust anyone under 30. Well, that's like shooting fish in a barrel. I mean, it's like Jay Leno and street walking. You can always find someone who doesn't know who the vice president is. But
very apt, actually. I've always thought that about that bit. Yep.
Yeah, but those, and I worry a lot about those people. I worry for all of us if we don't fix this structural youth unemployment problem.
You don't want an underclass of millions of people who are underemployed or unemployed getting angrier and angrier.
Who have access to the most powerful tool ever for organizing.
Yeah.
And like this could make the protests of the 60s look like kid stuff. And back to the big point, when you get a transition like this, say from agrarian feudal society to industrial capitalism, these things are punctuated often by huge chaos and calamity and even revolution. I mean, that transition, there was typically a revolution. The French Revolution, the American Revolution was arguably that. It was the old kings and nobles of the old agrarian sort of feudal mentality, and you had a new rising class of capitalists and entrepreneurs and others who wanted to have a very different kind of economy and a different kind of society. So the stakes are very high in government leaders and all of us agreeing that, look, you can't tinker anymore. We need to start to make some very fundamental changes to our institutions.
We had, it was really an interesting segment on Government 2.0 with Tim O'Reilly, and we talked about, and you've talked about this too, reinventing government. Government is a platform that is an open, you mentioned the Linux. The government could be used to do that too, where it's an open platform people can create for. But the point, government, talk about intransigent, talk about, heavily invested existing power. I mean, what do you do?
Well, on that one, there are signs of hope too. I'm working with the Prime Minister of Portugal right now, and they just adopted this thing called the Digital Economy Strategy, which is basically, a lot of it is macroeconomics.
Isn't that interesting? That's great.
Every kid in Portugal gets a laptop connected to a high-speed wireless network in the school. That'll be done by this year. With big training programs to reorient the teachers and the whole model of pedagogy away from a broadcast model.
Fantastic.
Fundamental change to government, not just e-gov or putting things online, as I'm sure Tim talked about, but changing how we get capability in society. This is a change in the division of labor in society on how we create public value. So governments, rather than we're the government. We collect money from you. We have all these people who work for us. We create services. We deliver them to you as a citizen. We hope you enjoy them. Well, governments will keep doing some of that. But how about, no, we're government. We're a platform. Yes. You know what? We have millions of categories of data. We're just going to release this raw data, and people can self-organize. I was with the mayor of the CEO of Melbourne, Australia.
They call him a CEO?
Well, it's actually a her. And she's not, there is a mayor, but she's the one who runs the government.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, it is. And so I said to her, let's talk about data. Take something trivial. Do you have data about bicycle accidents? She said, sure. And I said, just release it. Within a day, someone will do a mashup, Google Maps. You'll be saving lives in a week. It will cost you nothing. So anyway, so that's a kind of a powerful idea. But it's taking time. And in Portugal, though, they're doing that. They're doing the whole macroeconomics thing on the energy grid, a smart energy grid. They're taking some steps around the transportation system. This is a country that has a sovereign debt crisis. And you would think, they would be the last ones in the world to try and do this. But to my point, no, they've got the burning platform. They can't go on business as usual because they just can't fund the basic operations of government. So we need to rethink government fundamentally. He's also, his name is Socrates, and he's also very interested in a whole initiative around citizen engagement, basically changing the nature of democracy. And again, to your point, Leo, about the kids. I mean, the old model of democracy, you vote, I rule. Hey, I'm a politician. Listen up to these negative ads where I attack my opponents, and then you go vote for me. and then I'm going to broadcast to you for 4 years, and then we get to do it over again. Actually, you're not going to hear that much from me because most of the time I'm going to be raising money.
Raising more money to do it next time.
Yeah.
But Don, that's where we are today. We're so entrenched in this system.
It's brutal. It's brutal. I know, and lobbyists and Larry Lessig. Have you ever had him on?
Yeah, we love Larry. He's been on many times. Yeah.
So he's into this whole public funded thing, but this
he's
can't
not
be
getting
done.
a lot of traction. I mean, that's the problem.
I know, but it's
when you have entrenched power that benefits on this by this system, and they're the ones who are deciding whether the system survives or not. I don't see how you change it. You need the burning platform. You said it.
Yeah, and it's happening. And you need some common self-interest too. Like, would the banks actually place risk in the commons?
Maybe.
Well, if it gets bad enough. You know, I was with Mark Parker, CEO of Nike, and this was again at Davos, where he announced this thing with a bunch of other CEOs called the Green Exchange. We write about it in the book. This is amazing. You've got these companies that are taking their intellectual property and placing it in an exchange where others can get access to it, sometimes for free. So Nike gave away 400 patents, but 400 patents in the Green Exchange. And the idea is that, say if they got a patent that'll make rubber last 3 times longer, they place it in the Green Exchange. Adidas can't use it, but Rubber can. And Rubbermaid may, there may be some license royalty from Rubbermaid back to Nike, and then maybe Rubbermaid will add to the intellectual property, and Nike will be able to take advantage of that. So who would have imagined something like that 5 years ago? Companies placing their intellectual property, not in a commons, not just on the idea that a rising tide lifts all boats, but out of competitive, common sort of self-interest reasons. So that's something that makes me hopeful as well.
That's the key, isn't it? Ultimately, if you see it as your self-interest, it's going to happen. Do you think this is inevitable? Sometimes I wonder, there's certainly a struggle between the entrenched powers that be and the new digital generation. Do you think victory is inevitable for the internet generation?
Well, eventually they'll win.
We'll all die.
By demographic muscle alone.
Yeah.
And there's 80 million of them in the U.S. There's only 78 million baby boomers. And the boomers were supposed to be retiring now, but they're not because, of course, they can't.
We can't. Sorry.
So they're
we're keeping those jobs, damn it.
Kind of all hanging around. But there is a potential generational clash here that's huge. You can see it start to play out in certain places, like in the university. I'm convinced that the smartest kids in the United States don't go to lectures. The big thing is to get an A without having ever gone to the lecture.
Right.
And our universities are the very best model of learning that 17th century technology can provide. But excuse me, Mr. Professor, rather than lectures, could we read your notes, and then we'll have small group discussions or asynchronous discussions online. We'd like you to participate in those because we think you have interesting ideas. So there's that one shaping up. Another one is within the corporation itself. You have this new generation of digital natives coming in. They have a whole new culture of innovation and collaboration, having fun and networking and speed and customization and freedom and so on. They're bright-eyed, they're bushy-tailed, they're happy to have a job. At their fingertips are better tools than exist in our most sophisticated corporations. What do? We stick them in a cubicle, try and supervise them, treat them like Dilbert, and then we ban their tools.
Mm-hmm. You can't use Twitter. You better not Facebook here.
It's unbelievable. You do the opposite of what we should do.
I know. Well, that's why sometimes I get depressed because I feel like, we're kicking and screaming, right? And then sometimes I get very optimistic because I think in the long run this stuff has to happen. It's just going to happen, and it's not going to be pretty. Of course, it's not going to be pretty, but it's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it was just yesterday talking to a journalist. He was saying, "How do you know that we're all not just going to get back to normal? I mean, this is a recession, but eventually it'll end." And I said, well, forget about looking at it at the economic level. Just look at it from the point of view of these 15 institutions that we talk about, let's pick an institution like yours. You know, you work for a newspaper. Things are going to get back to normal.
Normal is not what you want.
You know, I'm sorry, but the train has left the station. The horse is out of the barn. The cat is out of the bag.
Yeah, normal.
We're normal. I mean, we're not getting back to some previous model of any of this stuff.
Forget normal. Don, I cannot wait to get to the part about the book about me. But no, I cannot wait to read the rest of MacroWikinomics. It is now in bookstores. Just came out today, macrowikinomics.com. Follow MacroWikinomics on Twitter as well. You've got a Twitter feed. Of course you do. And I know that many people are going to get to see you speak in the next few months. If you are somewhere where you could see Don speak, do. Because he's speaking the truth. Sometimes speaking the truth to power is painful, but ultimately it's uplifting and I think very positive.
Thank you very much. I'm slowed down a little bit. I don't know if you can see this. I have a broken collarbone.
Oh no, what happened?
And a vehicle accident.
Oh, dear, sorry.
Yeah, I wish I could say it was Formula One, but it was a golf cart.
No! You should have stopped at vehicle accident.
Anyway, by the way, on Twitter, I'm Tapscott, at Tapscott, too. If anyone wants to communicate with me that way, that's great.
Do you talk to people on Twitter?
Oh, yeah. I'm no Leo Laporte, but I've actually, in terms of Twitter, but I wrote this book on Twitter. I asked people for stuff. They did research.
Oh, that's neat.
They helped me out. And
it's a crowdsourced book.
Well, sort of. The final chapter of Wikinomics was a wiki, actually. It was written by 1,500 people.
I love that.
We didn't do that for this book, but I'm very proud of it. And it's more than a book for me and for Anthony. It's really a mission now. I mean, I have kids, and I'm convinced that this is a time of great promise, but it's a time of great peril, and that we've got to find the leadership and the will to make these changes happen.
Couldn't agree more. My daughter's at Bard, and Leon Botstein, who's been there now for 35 years, is really trying to reinvent higher education. I think it's very interesting what they're doing there, and I can actually I'm very hopeful, because I think that there are some institutions where people are really trying to look at this and fix it.
Well, when you read the book, you'll feel very hopeful at the end, because there's so much stuff going on, and a lot of it is just hasn't got to the surface yet. But we were able to find a bunch of these good stories.
That's great. Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
And feel better. Stay away from the golf course. It's dangerous, you know. Take care, Don.
Golf cart accidents, according to my surgeon, are a major source of trauma and death.
By the way, among a certain group, we won't...
There was no alcohol involved.
Okay.
It was a rainy day.
Yeah, no, I have friends who rolled a golf cart and there was alcohol involved, and it was actually... They survived, but barely. It was bad. Don, great to talk to you.
Okay, take care.